The day I discovered luxury vacation cabins sitting on my ranch land was the day my quiet life turned into a legal war nobody saw coming. My name is Cole Mercer, and for 3 generations my family had owned thousands of acres of ranch property stretching across rolling hills and untouched woodland. It wasn't flashy, but it was ours. What made this story unbelievable was that the person behind the construction wasn't some random developer. It was the president of the neighboring HOA, a woman named Diane Whitaker, someone who acted like every inch of land within eyesight belonged to her community. At first, I thought it was a simple property line mistake. Bro, I couldn't have been more wrong. Within weeks, expensive cabins appeared, reservations were being accepted, tourists were arriving, and money was changing hands on land Diane didn't legally own. What happened next shocked everyone involved, because when my attorney started digging through the paperwork, he uncovered a truth that transformed a property dispute into something far bigger than anyone expected. By the time I first noticed the construction crews, several acres of my northern property had already been cleared. The area sat far from my main ranch house, tucked behind a stretch of woodland that I only inspected every few months. Normally, nothing ever happened there. It was rough terrain, mostly valuable for grazing and preserving access routes across the ranch. That's exactly why the activity immediately caught my attention. Heavy equipment, stacks of lumber, concrete deliveries, and temporary fencing had appeared seemingly overnight. At first, I assumed someone had made an honest mistake. Property boundaries in rural areas can occasionally create confusion, especially when neighboring developments expand toward older ranch land. I drove out expecting a short conversation and a quick correction. Instead, I found workers moving with complete confidence, as if they had every legal right to be there. That alone felt strange. The foreman informed me that the project had been approved months earlier and that all permits had already been secured. Hearing that immediately raised questions. Nobody had contacted me. Nobody had requested access. Nobody had discussed easements. Yet construction was moving at full speed. Naturally, I started asking around. That was when Diane Whitaker's name kept surfacing. Diane wasn't just another resident. She was the HOA president of the upscale community bordering my ranch. Over the years, she had built a reputation for involving herself in matters that had absolutely nothing to do with the neighborhood. She constantly pushed expansion projects, promoted luxury amenities, and seemed obsessed with increasing property values. Plenty of people admired her confidence. Plenty of others quietly avoided her. Looking back, that should have been my first warning sign. The more information I gathered, the stranger the situation became. The cabins weren't intended as private residences. They were luxury rental units aimed at wealthy tourists looking for a countryside getaway. Marketing materials were already circulating online. Future guests were being promised exclusive views, private trails, wildlife experiences, and access to scenic portions of land that belonged entirely to my family. Bro, when I heard that part, I genuinely had to read the documents twice. People were advertising experiences on property they didn't own. Even more shocking, reservations were reportedly being accepted months before construction was complete. Money was already flowing into the project. Investors were involved. Contractors had been paid. Promotional campaigns were running. The entire operation seemed far too organized to be based on a simple misunderstanding. I immediately hired a survey company to verify the boundaries. A few days later, the results arrived. The cabins weren't near my property line. They weren't partially on my land. They were completely on my land. Every structure. Every foundation. Every access road. Every utility trench. The survey left absolutely no room for interpretation. At that point, most people would assume the situation would end quickly. Show the survey, stop construction, and move on. That's what I expected too. Instead, the moment the findings became known, Diane doubled down. Construction continued. Additional crews arrived. Landscaping work began. Utility installations accelerated. It was almost as if someone believed they were protected by something bigger than a simple permit approval. That was the detail that kept bothering me. People don't usually pour millions of dollars into projects while ignoring clear ownership records. Something wasn't adding up. The deeper we looked, the more inconsistencies appeared. Permit applications contained unusual descriptions. Property references seemed oddly vague. Certain signatures looked difficult to trace. None of it proved wrongdoing by itself, but the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. So I hired a property attorney with decades of experience handling land disputes. I expected him to send a few legal notices and resolve the matter professionally. Instead, after reviewing the records for less than a week, he called me with a tone I had never heard before. And according to him, the cabins themselves weren't the biggest problem. Not even close. For my attorney spent the next several days pulling records from county offices, permit archives, land registries, and development filings. What began as a straightforward property dispute was rapidly turning into something far more complicated. Every time he verified one document, another inconsistency appeared somewhere else. At first, the discrepancies seemed minor. Then they started forming a pattern. The project paperwork repeatedly referenced parcels that didn't match the land where the cabins were actually being built. Certain maps attached to permit applications appeared to show one location while the written descriptions referred to another. Even stranger, some supporting documents seemed to rely on boundary information that had been outdated for years. None of that automatically proved wrongdoing, but it created a trail of questions nobody could answer. Meanwhile, construction pushed forward at an incredible pace. The first cabins were nearly finished. Decorative stone entrances appeared along access roads. Landscaping crews planted trees and installed lighting. Online advertisements became more aggressive, showcasing luxurious renderings and promising visitors an exclusive retreat experience. Future booking dates were already filling up. Bro, this part was unbelievable. The project wasn't slowing down despite mounting evidence that the entire development sat on property owned by someone else. If anything, they seemed to be rushing faster. Then my attorney uncovered the detail that changed everything. Buried inside a collection of filings was a chain of documents suggesting that someone had attempted to create the appearance of legal access rights across my ranch. The paperwork was incomplete, contradictory, and filled with gaps, but it pointed toward a possibility far worse than a simple mistake. If his interpretation was correct, people involved with the project may have been relying on records that never should have supported construction in the first place. Suddenly, the cabins weren't the only thing at risk. Investors could lose money. Reservations could be cancelled. Permits could face scrutiny. Entire contracts could unravel. And as word quietly began spreading among contractors and local officials, panic started creeping into places where confidence had existed only weeks before. The real storm was finally approaching, and Diane still had no idea what my attorney was about to uncover next. The turning point arrived on a Tuesday morning when my attorney requested an emergency meeting with county officials, survey experts, and several parties connected to the cabin development. By then, rumors were already circulating. Contractors were asking questions. Investors wanted answers. Local officials were quietly reviewing files they had previously approved without much concern. What nobody expected was how quickly the situation would unravel. During the meeting, my attorney presented a timeline that connected every questionable filing, boundary reference, and permit application associated with the project. One by one, he demonstrated how critical decisions had been based on information that did not accurately reflect the land where construction occurred. The evidence didn't rely on assumptions or speculation. It came directly from official records, surveys, historical maps, and county documents. As the presentation continued, the room reportedly grew quieter and quieter. Bro, hearing about this afterward completely blew my mind. The luxury cabins had been marketed as the centerpiece of an exclusive destination. Investors believed they were funding a profitable expansion. Future guests had already made reservations. Yet the entire business model rested on the assumption that the project occupied land legally available for development. 6. That assumption was now collapsing. County officials immediately ordered a comprehensive review of the permits connected to the project. Construction activity was halted pending investigation. Contractors began distancing themselves from responsibility. Some investors reportedly demanded explanations regarding how millions of dollars had been committed before ownership questions were fully resolved. Then came the moment Diane never saw coming. My attorney filed a series of legal actions seeking removal of the structures, compensation for unauthorized use of the property, restoration costs for damaged ranch land, and recovery of profits connected to activities conducted on the site. Instead of defending against a simple boundary dispute, Diane and the development team suddenly faced a mountain of potential financial exposure. The pressure intensified almost overnight. Reservation platforms suspended listings. Promotional campaigns disappeared. Potential buyers and investors backed away. News of the dispute spread throughout the region, attracting attention from people who had previously viewed the project as a guaranteed success. What made the outcome especially satisfying was the malicious compliance aspect of it all. For years, Diane had insisted that every rule, regulation, and property restriction be enforced to the letter whenever it benefited her community. Now the exact same principle was being applied to her project. Every permit requirement, every land use regulation, every ownership record, and every procedural step was being examined with microscopic attention. The luxury retreat that was supposed to elevate her reputation became the very thing threatening it. And once the investigations expanded beyond the original property dispute, the balance of power shifted completely. Diane was no longer dictating terms to everyone around her. She was struggling to explain how the project had ever moved forward in the first place. 7. Over the following months, the legal battles gradually moved toward resolution. The dramatic headlines faded, but the consequences remained very real. After extensive negotiations and mounting pressure from investors, insurers, and county officials, a settlement framework finally began to take shape. The cabins that had once been advertised as a luxury destination never opened to the public. Several structures were removed, while others became part of a broader agreement designed to compensate for the damage done to the ranch. Restoration crews spent months repairing disturbed land, removing unauthorized infrastructure, and restoring portions of the property that had been altered during construction. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was far better than allowing the situation to continue. Financially, the project became a cautionary tale. Investors recovered only portions of what they expected. Development plans were abandoned. Future expansion proposals disappeared almost immediately. The dream of turning my family's land into someone else's profitable resort was over. As for Diane, her influence declined rapidly. People who once praised her leadership started asking difficult questions. Trust evaporated. Community support weakened. Eventually, she stepped away from the position that had given her so much authority. Meanwhile, ranch operations returned to normal. The land remained in my family's hands, exactly where it belonged. After years of stress, uncertainty, and legal battles, the property was finally quiet again. And for the first time since the construction crews arrived, I could drive across those hills without wondering what surprise would be waiting around the next corner. Looking back, this entire situation feels like a perfect example of what happens when entitlement collides with reality. Diane believed confidence could replace ownership, paperwork could replace facts, and momentum could replace accountability. 8. It worked for a while, until the truth caught up. Bro, that's exactly how these stories unfold in real life. The bigger the shortcut, the harder the landing. What shocked me most wasn't that someone tried to take advantage of the situation. It was how many people assumed nobody would ever check the records. In the end, the ranch stayed where it belonged, the facts won, and karma handled the rest. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another unbelievable HOA showdown. Drop a comment below and tell me, at what point do you think Diane realized the entire plan was falling apart?